Greetings, I'm Luz.
And I am Scandal.
And let's review a book together.
Woo!
Alright, so we are going to be reviewing the introduction to They, Them, Their by Eris, which was performed by my good friend here, Scandal.
Yay! And also the subtext, just the subtitle, obviously, is A Guide to Non-Binary and Genderqueer Identities.
So this is a scientific, or at least factual approach to the statistics and things around non-binaryism, as well as just like a current cultural climate, but again based on statistics and interviews. It's not like a whole...
And also the author's personal basically experience with it as well, since they are also non-binary.
Right, so what they basically describe in the preview, which if you haven't heard it, you can check it out on our channel. It's a video right before this one. But if you haven't read the book, you might go check it out if you're interested in that kind of thing, or you can just try the preview and see what you think. During the preview, the author seemed to make it very clear that basically what they were going to cover was sort of a systematic set of problems where each chapter was going to focus on one different thing that was a major piece of non-binary life.
Right.
Essentially, and or the non-binary experience.
As much as they could, because there's always that thing. So I know sometimes people will be like, but you could have done this thing, or this thing, is this thing. It's like, we would be here all day. And also sometimes that's literally out of the scope of their interests or abilities. And I really appreciate that they mentioned going, if I didn't catch this, feel free to talk about it. Yeah. You know, kind of thing. That's an invitation to be like, I like that sort of discussion. So
this book, it seemed like it was a good approach to the topic based on the introduction. I mean, we obviously didn't read the whole thing yet. Right. But they were very thoughtful in their approach. They seemed very inclusive. And also, as Scandal said, very willing to learn, very open about it. And especially in the sense of, hey, if I've missed something or if I've misrepresented something, please let me know. Right. They're also very broad with their terms, going, this term can be used for this and other things, which is really nice, but they also have a glossary, which is greatly helpful.
Which, granted, I didn't read, but it is definitely in there, so if you pick it up, even if you just kind of go through the glossary section, and you've never really been exposed to this idea before, it can be a good starting point, because I will say that as with stuff like this is really complex. In fact, even with Eris Young, they actually go off in a great amount of detail culturally later on in the book, and they even make some reference to it of going, the idea of a they, them, and their has existed in so many other cultures for thousands of years. This is not just a single isolated, we are assuming in this case, you guys are mostly a US-based audience.
Well, because that's where we are.
Yeah, right. But apparently also this author is actually from the UK. So what they're talking about is being like, this is a much broader category, and I can't cover it all anyway.
And Eris was really good, actually, in there about, being like, here's what I want to cover and here's how I did it. Sort of sourcing their resources, right? Which they have an entire section on all of their sources and what they did and where they went and where they, the kind of studies that they looked at, etc. And also, they themselves are non-binary, and so a lot of it is speaking from their own experience, but also labeling it when they're speaking from their own experience, which I think is kind of cool.
It's actually a really good tool to also establish going, this is my opinion. They're very good about doing that. Like, in my experience, my opinion, I know some people go, well, that's implied, and you're like, it's actually sometimes really important to establish that, so you know kind of where your boundaries are.
Yeah, in the actual writing in the intro, I felt like Eris was very clear with things. Like, some of the sentences were a bit run on as far as
very long,
as far as verbal performance is concerned, but they were not bad to read just to yourself.
Yeah, no.
And they were very inclusive, as I said before, just sort of in the sense of being broadly covering, but also very specific about what they're looking for and what their intention is to do.
Right. And I honestly really just enjoyed it anyway, because I'm always curious about being able to put out more material like this in the world anyway. This has been a thing, as Eris points out themselves, of just going, these terms have existed for a long time. We have even used they, them, and their, even without assuming a binary anyway, or just going, or that there is one or not one, right? The whole spectrum of just going, we always go, even if that's clearly a she, or we know that they identify as a she, we sometimes go, hey, they're over there.
Yes.
It's very much where people, I've always found that to be very difficult sometimes, where people go, why do you want these pronouns? And it's like, because you use them all the time anyway? What makes the difference?
That is one of the strangest things that I've encountered, actually, when I refer to the people that I know that don't identify as either man or woman, and I say they, sometimes I'll get a sort of, why don't you just say girl, or isn't they plural, which I think is interesting. But, it's really, have you seen Jennifer? Yeah, they are standing over there. It's really, it works just fine. So the author covers a little bit of that too, basically just being like, these the same kind of words, which are just gender neutral referentials or gender neutral pronouns, are used throughout language and around the world. And yes, some languages are gendered, and the way we interpret them, linguistically, there we are, is that we consider it to be another gender name, because it isn't really a gender neutral pronoun like they or them and their, because their whole language is gendered. You know, a door is feminine, shoes are masculine, the statue is feminine, a cat is masculine, etc., etc. Then you have another pronoun for another gender.
Right.
And so we just translate it the best we can. The interesting thing about translating anything from language to language is really that you only have the limitations of what your own language allows. And if we only have 2 pronouns that are specific and a neutral, if they have 3 or 4 or 5 specific, we don't have any words for that.
Yeah, we really don't.
Unless we go, this pronoun that they use means masculine woman. Right? Essentially.
Except that that's also incredibly overly simplistic.
It is.
Like, it's that like, it's very difficult sometimes for a lot of people, like, to really go, I'm going to try to translate this without this years of context and information.
Exactly.
Which is where I appreciate where, like, Eris was like, there's so much history here, and you really can't just boil it down overnight, which has been one of those things that a lot of people struggle with in regards to, you know, any amount of documentation of history, but also in particular with gender.
Just trying to quantify it really simply. I mean, a lot of us haven't taken or gotten a lot of experience with gender anyways, and so our basic understanding of it is that incredibly basic. Most of us have never been educated on gender, and so being exposed to an idea of gender is basically like being exposed to a deeper study of something we have been incredibly familiar with but never done much about. Sort of like a circus has always been around or near you in, you know, many American cultures, but you may never have gone. You know what the idea is, you may have seen it on movies or shows, but you don't know much about it.
Right? You have this weird cultural idea of, like, you're like, oh, I know what a CEO is, but when you actually break it down, you're like, I don't actually know what a CEO is.
What does a CEO do? Anyway, but yeah, so I thought Eris had a really thoughtful approach. I've read a number of academic books, and I like nonfiction a lot, and so Eris's approach made a lot of sense to me and worked well, and especially in the introduction, which is the part we cover in the preview, it really broke everything down very thoughtfully, and I liked how they addressed basically warnings and take care of yourself while reading this book, and also that the book is structured to be read in any order. That actually made it, I really liked that, where the chapters don't directly lead into each other. So if there is something that is like basically a sensitive topic for you, or something you're not comfortable with for whatever reason, you can pick up part of it that would help you, or that would edify you in some way that you're interested in, and just read that without feeling lost. Or at least that's the idea that Eris pitches.
Right. And again, like, I am curious to kind of keep reading this book. We actually didn't continue reading it after the fact because we've also got other things to do. But I would definitely, as far as it goes for me, I would certainly recommend this anyway. Like, it seems, like I said, a good primer. There are a lot of things of going, yeah, if you're sensitive to this kind of stuff, it might be something, you know, take care of yourself in, you know, because some of the material they cover is, like, they talk about, you know, how non-binary identities or genderqueer identities actually have so many things they might struggle with in regards to, like, medical fields, the way their families might react to them, because there is, at least in, I will say, in what was being like, the assumption here is, I think, mostly going to be, like, you know, North America, and I'm talking about mostly North American, and then probably the UK. Like, we have a lot of mostly primarily English speaking, which is completely oversimplifying it, right? But there's a lot of it going, like, there is an assumption of basically a certain part of the globe that is mostly going to attach itself to this book. So this might be helpful, even if you're going, hey, I'm not from that part of the world, but it might be interesting to see how somebody else basically interprets this, or how they want to talk about it, or how they want to discuss it. Like, it's a good building block, I think.
The author also talks about very thoroughly that they're not an expert, but they are basically a subject matter expert, in the sense that they've lived it. At your job, you can have a subject matter expert just because they work on it all the time. They're not a field expert.
Right, that one.
And so Eris has a lot of experience in that, and they talk about their
personal
own journey,
experience,
which can be really relevant. But yeah, some of the sensitive topics they talk about is the fact that since gender is often associated with sex, have been a lot of sexual violence or sex crimes against people who have different gender identities or expressions, and that's just kind of unfortunately how we've developed in this, you know, in some parts of the world. Anyway, overall, I liked it. I thought it was a good approach. I thought they had a good handle on the material. I liked their linguistic and literary approach. I felt like they were a good writer that was accessible to read. Like, even when they used larger terms, they really just kept it simple so it'd be accessible.
Which was honestly really nice and really refreshing. So yeah, guys, I guess this has been Scandal.
And I have been Lies, and thank you for joining us. If you have opinions or thoughts on this, or if you've read the whole thing, or if there's other material you would like to recommend in reference to this, we would love to hear it.
Absolutely. Have a great day, guys. Bye.
Bye.